Day. Did we get to Daniel Webster?
No, we don't have the next concession.
Didn't we get to Daniel Webster?
Yeah, we got
Yeah,
They got Webster. Who proposed the Compromise of 1850? Yeah, but he refused to break it up. So I was looking for something the other day. I was looking for a different cartoon, and I found this cartoon about Clay not breaking up the bill. And it's kind of shocking the way the cartoons work there, but it also kind of gives you an idea what they're thinking. But this is talking about the issue of slavery and Clay trying to split the issue of slavery to find a compromise. And yeah, it's supposed to be a creepy cartoon, but I'm just fascinated about the way they drew political cartoons in the 1850s and 60s. Who would be the editor and author of the North Star? Someone said, no, this Garrison was the author of, what was his paper?
Liberator.
Liberator, yeah. I know you got a newspaper name. And 1831, he started at 1831. What rebellion was also the same year, so Southerners could blame abolitionists. Yeah, Nat Turners. The American Colonization Society would create what country?
Liberia.
Yeah, Liberia. What was Zachary Taylor's plan to deal with the Mexican cession? This whole thing, no, free. 2 free states. Who are the Southerners who went nuts? What do you call that new wave of congressmen who will blow the whole thing up? Fire eaters. You got just enough snow to cover it up and have a reflection of sun on snow into my eyes. Good.
Sorry. I didn't mean to say that out loud.
Oh, so you
Sorry.
hide the plot against me.
Yeah, I don't think you say it out loud to Mr. Harris, but I actually cannot.
Okay, put minus 50 on your notes.
Okay.
I'll remember. All right, so who's this? That's Clay. Has that wry grin. He refused to break the play. Refused to break up the bill. Who's that? And who proposed 2 presidents? That's Webster. Who proposed 2 presidents? John C. Neck hair. Watch this one more time. Don't you love that? And I showed you this wonderful picture, right? So we say about the 4th of July, do we have what happened to Taylor? Would he die of probably? Cholera. So we're at a little bit of a problem here. It looks like it's over. The Union is done. The United States is over. And the president dies. I mean, what a time. Who will save the country? Who? Got nobody here. Who? There's only one person. We all know who it is. Raoul C. Calhoun. John's brother, yeah. And he would step into the breach. And he's made up. Notice the finger, though? Somebody drew Raoul C. Calhoun, so I put him up. Huh? Why wouldn't they? Well, it wasn't quite the way you would think. The new president was considered kind of a lightweight named Millard Fillmore. And Fillmore, Northern Whig, he was not considered to be much, but he was more open to compromise. And with Taylor dying, kind of shook everyone to their core. So during that hot summer, they continued to work. Normally, Congress would adjourn and go home in the summers of Washington, D.C. because it was so hot. Well, another senator, a young Northern Democrat, so write down Democrat, I forgot to put a D, the little giant, Stephen Douglas. He's about 5'5", so he's called the little giant. He was incredibly intelligent, very ambitious, pragmatic to the point of being terrified, And he did what Henry Clay did in 1820, but refused to do in 1850. He broke the bill up into 3 parts. Therefore, they get passed individually by section. So it's not a compromise where everybody gave up something in the bill, just certain sections voted for each part. So let's go back. Remember I had you write down 4 of the 5 parts of the Compromise of 1850? Let's go back to that because we're going to add one more thing to it. So this is what they did. California free remained the same. But this is what they added. The slave, not slavery like Clay's original proposal, the slave trade. So no more open slave markets in the nation's capital. Now this is a territory, so the federal government still makes the laws for the territory. By the way, now the federal government has given the city government of Washington, D.C. to make the laws, but they can take it back if they want. But anyways, back to this. Now, Southerners were furious about this, but they can still bring their slaves there. They just couldn't have the big open slave markets. It was symbolic, but a pretty performative action. It didn't really change much. But what section voted for those two, North or South? Almost all Northerners, Whig or Democrats, or put an N by it, those two. The most controversial was popular sovereignty. So they got rid of the word popular sovereignty and replaced it with write their own constitution. So you already have that down. So they could say they write their own constitution, but everybody knew it meant popular sovereignty. So that's the third part. 3. This opened up New Mexico and Utah to slavery. That passed. What section voted for this, North or South? South. So we got that part in the South. And then the next part, the last 2 bills. So 4 and 5. So this is the last 2. So we got North, South, here. They stuck this one on here because this was kind of controversial, the both sections. But this would pass, the Fugitive Slave Law. So we already have this written down from yesterday. And this, which section voted for this together? The South. So 3 sections, North, South, South. And party didn't matter. Every Whig and every Democrat in the South voted for the Southern section. A few Northern Democrats joined, for the most part, it's only Democrats, joined the South for the second 2 bills. Here, virtually no, for the first 2, for California as a free state, virtually no Southerners voted for it, but there was more than enough here to pass it. So the minority section got what they wanted. This was, in reality, a big Southern victory, but not a complete Southern victory. So let's get to the key moment here. Was it a success? I should add, these are not open to slavery. And so both New Mexico territory and Utah territory, very reluctantly, Utah, they're kind of worried about it, but they would have to pass a couple big laws to be allowed in. They banned plural marriage, and they passed slave codes. New Mexico did too. So this is now has slavery. Not a lot of people brought slaves in, but people did. Back to this. Was it successful? Did it save the Union? The Compromise of 1850. Did it save the Union? We're still here. Sometimes shaky. It saved the Union, but not perfect. It did not prevent civil war. And so many flaws it's hard to even mention. It was not a great piece of legislation combined, but the Union is still here. And the reason why, I can show you with one picture, I've showed you something like this before. 1850 and 1860, the whole country, especially the North, changed dramatically in those 10 years. Here, 1850, those red lines, railroads. 1860, railroads. Do you see the difference? So much more industrialized in the North. In those 10 years, a dramatic change. If the Civil War would have happened in 1850, the South would have won, the U.S. would have. 1860 or 61 when it was fought, it was a close run thing. The United States almost lost a couple different times, but the United States would win and survive the Civil War. And it's complex to say one reason, but this, you can see, goes 10 years, just different. It was close. If Atlanta would have held out for another month and a half, Lincoln might have lost her re-election, and the United States would have lost the Civil War. So it was really a close run thing. So, oh, I almost forgot. When it ended, the bill was passed. The bills were passed. And they had been fighting, flashing knives and guns. All of a sudden, literally overnight, they were hugging. They pulled out the champagne. They were celebrating. I mean, there really was this feeling, kind of a high. We saved the country. They knew it was imperfect, but they saved it. It was even more dramatic than 1820, much more than 1833. It really felt like it was over. Fillmore got no credit. Nobody really likes Fillmore. We're not done with him, but he would not run for re-election. Well, the Whigs would not renominate him. So the election of 1852, the Democrats are kind of riding a high. They saved the country. Frederick Douglass was Stephen Douglas got that bill passed. So they nominated Franklin Pierce of New Hampshire. He was a doughface. Let's go into doughface in just a second. The Whigs tried one more time with a war hero, Winfield Scott. The problem is, Old Fuss and Feathers really doesn't have the same appeal as Old Rough and Ready. Fuss and Feathers. And then the Free Soil Party lost a lot of their steam because of popular sovereignty. So John Hale was not quite the candidate as Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren most of the time spoke Dutch. He was born to Dutch parents. That's just a little thing, which of course they called Deutsch, or they called, they all claimed he was German, but he was Dutch. The Democrats have a great advantage because the Whigs tried one more time. Hey, he took Mexico City. Here, he saved the Union popular sovereignty. What's a doughface? A doughface is a Northern Democrat. So a Northern Democrat that supports the South. Northern Democrat supports the South. So he could appeal to Southerners. He supported pro-slavery policies. Why a doughface? Well, remember, this is 1852. So references from 1852 actually sound wrong to my ears, but I'll tell you the thinking behind it. What color is dough? If you see red dough, what color is it? Kind of tannish, white, kind of light. So the idea was, okay, a white face. I got dough face. A white face for the Northern White Republic. Okay, you take it off its blackface. So it's actually it's hiding its promotion of the slave republic in the South. No, it's not hiding that he supports slaves or people of African descent in the country. It just means he's promoting slave policies. I know that seems a little bit odd, but that's what it meant in 1852. He's a doughface. It started as an insult, then it became a thing for Northern Democrats to say, support me, I'm a doughface. Oh, one more thing about Pierce. His great-great-granddaughter, pretty wealthy patrician family, his great-great-granddaughter would be named Barbara Pierce, and she would marry, she's from a pretty wealthy family, marry another from a very wealthy family, a guy named George Herbert Walker Bush, from a very wealthy New England financial family, and George Herbert Walker Bush would become president. And their son, George W. Bush, would become president. He'd be the president when you were born. And so the George W. Bush's great-great-great-grandfather was Franklin Pierce. And Pierce is considered to be one of the worst presidents in American history. Maybe the worst, but that's saying a lot, because wait till the next one. He would be elected president in an overwhelming Democratic sweep, but it hid so many problems. It hid all of these problems. And the Free Soil Party lost a lot of steam. Pierce's wife died soon after the election, and Pierce probably had a drinking problem, became an out-and-out drunk. And so his presidency would be personified by this horrible drunkard with a terrible alcoholism disease, and combined with some of his policy issues. So pretty big victory. Big victory. But everything, all the issues with the Compromise of 1850 are going to come out at once. It's no coincidence that same year, Uncle Tom's Cabin came out. The great anti-slavery book, become the most popular book of the decade, and one of the most popular books of the century. Actually, it replaces the #1 bestseller, a book called 12 Years a Slave, about a man who was kidnapped in Maryland and taken down south and kidnapped and forced into slavery, finally could get away after 12 years. They made a movie about this about 6 years ago. It's a pretty amazing movie. Rated R, it tells the reality of slavery. But it also shows that in the North, there was a growing kind of distaste about slavery. Harriet Beecher Stowe never actually went to the South. She's from Massachusetts. But she wrote what's considered to be a fairly accurate, even though melodramatic story. When Abraham Lincoln would meet her, he would say, "So you're the little woman who started this war." In 1862. I'm not sure, he meant it as a compliment, but it doesn't sound kind of weird, doesn't it? And Uncle Tom's a great hero in this story. A great hero. But later on, he would be mocked in front of white audiences as kind of a clown. They were called minstrel shows, where essentially made fun of blacks. White people would dress in blackface and make fun of them, make fun of blacks. And that's going to become an insult amongst African Americans, which is sad because he's a great hero in the story. Also, remember those fugitive slave laws? Well, these laws directly infringed on state laws in the North. And they were furious about these laws. Before I explain the posters, let me tell you about the fugitive slave laws. I think I mentioned this yesterday. Every adult male citizen, and since there was no definition of what adult was, it would have been all males in this room, must join a posse, which was deputized to run down slaves, or you go to jail. And once this law came out, slave hunters and kidnappers would go north and just run down free people, capturing them and claiming they're runaway slaves. That's what happened in that book I told you about, 12 Years a Slave. Well, the law said it goes to a judge. It could be a district judge, a local judge, or a federal judge, but mostly district judges. And the judge would make just an arbitrary decision. They're free or they're slave. But they'll be paid, that's why I have a dollar sign, for their services. And now this was supposed to be about how much paperwork. But if they found that person who was captured and said they're a slave, they said, "No, you're free." The judges paid $5. If they're found to be a slave, the judges paid $10. Doesn't that sound like outright bribery to force them into slavery? 5 to 10. Now they claimed it was because there's more paperwork. But yeah, it was rigged to kidnap more people. That is why you have this read and ponder the slave law disregards ordinary securities of personal liberty. Here's warning people of Boston, watch out for kidnappers and slave catchers. Yeah. You can't really rate it now. It's really hard to do, but it would be anywhere, it's hard to save anywhere from $500 to $1,000. But it's really hard to compare money back then because they didn't have the same currency system. There's been a lot of inflation, and just people use their money differently. But it would be significant. Enough to look pretty fishy. So, with that, northern states started passing personal liberty laws, which basically just disregarded federal law. And it was a gray area. What is that term? Remember that term from way back when? Where you have federal laws and then state laws and there's a separation. What is that called? I just gave you a hint. That's federalism. And this said, hey, the states said, no, it is our right as states to say you don't have to join a posse. And we're not going to allow free people to be kidnapped into slavery. Well, how did the Southerners react to personal liberty laws? They went nuts. They absolutely went nuts. They saw this as a direct attack on them. You're encouraging people to run away. You're encouraging slave rebellion. You're going to cut our throats in the middle of the night. And so they're telling northern states, you don't have the right of states. You must follow the fugitive slave laws, which is a federal law. Yet, this is where you're going to get a new term that's going to be rumbling in the 1840s, but by the 1850s, because of this, Southerners will say, it is our right that you must defend our right as states to have slaves. So they called it states' rights. And what states' rights meant was not that states have rights. It meant that everything must be done to protect slavery. That's what states' rights meant. They meant that southern states should be allowed to have slaves any way they want, and northern states cannot pass laws on their own that have any effect on slavery. The only laws that matter are pro-slavery. They masked it with states' rights by saying it's pro-state, but we were very clear about it. If you don't get that on, get this down. It was to mask forcing the North to return runaway slaves. And this became code for pro-slavery. States' rights would rumble around, but in 1948, states' rights would make a big return. When Southern Democrats left the Democratic Party because of Harry Truman's push for civil rights and equal rights for African Americans, the Southerners who opposed that, Southern Democrats, would call their party the States' Rights Party. And states' rights would become code for anti-civil rights. That's coming in 1948. Yes, all of a sudden Confederate battle flags appeared. It was a big deal. But this is huge. So, at the same time, Southerners and the dope-based government of peers is pushing to expand the United States. Filibusters, which is from a French term, a Dutch term for pirate, freebooter, I can't pronounce it, started looking for, hey, let's start taking places in Latin America. Start a revolution, take over, get annexed, and join the Union. All over Latin America. They tried in Mexico all the way down to Colombia, Bolivia. There were attempts. The most famous was in, this map is all weird, Nicaragua. It was green and it was yellow, okay, but Nicaragua. An American just thug pirate by the name of William Walker actually overthrew the government of Nicaragua and tried to get the United States to annex it, to make it a slave state, until the Nicaraguans ran him out. Well, dictators don't get run out. They assassinated them and took back their country. Actually, it's a big deal, because Nicaragua tried to invade Costa Rica. William Walker tried to do the same thing there, and the Costa Ricans stopped them on their border, and that's like, to Costa Rica, that's like their spot where we truly became independent. It's right on the northern border. And I really like Costa Rica. I've been there, it's really cool. But those are filibusters, pirates. At the same time, here's a cartoon showing Secretary of State and other dope-face, Buchanan, surrounded by filibusters. You see the 6-barrel pistol? You see that? There were 6 barrels you could load each individually, muzzle loading. And the idea would be you could fire one and then turn it so you could fire significantly faster. You fire, you have to turn it by hand. The problem was it had a bad habit of blowing up in your hand. So, but it looked cool. So have a lot of pictures of those. And they were accurate to well over 5 feet. I could easily hit the ground from here. But at the same, yeah.
Is that what the idea?
It's coming, yeah. In fact, the first revolver is just being invented at this time, the Colt revolver. Actually, the first one, and they will be each individually muzzle loaded. You fire and it would turn automatically. You had to load them each by hand. You'll kind of use a ramrod. I actually have one, a Navy revolver from 1852. It's a replica.
Can you take a picture and show us?
Sure. In the old days, I used to be able to bring it in.
Yeah.
So, this is also going to lead to the Austin Manifesto, where the United States Secretary of State Buchanan said, hey, let's take Cuba. That fits into it. And the U.S. is going to try, filibusters will try. Cuba could be 2 slave states. The United States has always had a special interest in Cuba. We've tried to overthrow the Cuban government many times. So, but it all starts with trying to get more slave states. So this really shows the attitude and what's going on. And this leads to the same thing will be going on this time. It starts in 1806, the Senate rule, that they will take the name of those freeloaders and call it the filibuster. And the filibuster at first would be just used as a way, it's called unlimited debate. It's a Senate rule saying you can debate until you're done. You basically can debate, there can be no vote until debate's done, and there's no limit on debate. The Senate just made up this rule, proposed ironically by Vice President Aaron Burr, but the whole thing is to stifle the majority. And it would be used by a number of different people. In 1850, so it was used a couple times to stop, to slow down bills that were seen as maybe could be used down the road against slavery. But it's rarely used. Stifle majority rule. But it's called the filibuster. Almost never used. But they changed the rules in the 60s and 70s for various reasons to say that you can stop a filibuster at 60 votes, but you don't actually have to debate. All you have to do is announce, I'm going to filibuster, and then that stops any law. And so today, in the United States Senate, it requires 60 votes to pass a law. How many members of the Senate are there? 100. So it requires a supermajority to pass virtually any law in the Senate. And this has a big impact. This is how many bills used to be passed in the Senate. This is the last I can find this data, but it's going to 2014. And it's even more now. Nothing is passed. Nothing is done. There's no action. Now, some might say that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you want to know why nothing appears to ever get done? And when it is done, it's kind of, wow, that's a bad thing. Really complex and convoluted. This is why. Who wanted 2 presidents? He kind of got one. That kind of happened. And what happened is there were virtually no filibusters, and then it started exploding. Republicans started filibustering everything President Obama did, and then the Democrats said, what the hell, then we'll do it. So they everything that President Trump did, and then what's happening now, Republicans are filibustering. Yeah, so that's what's happening now. And yeah, clearly some senators must like the fact that they don't have to do anything, therefore they never have to make controversial votes. There's a lack of courage, I would say. Pretty big lack of courage. Moving on. Now the biggie. Now the biggie. 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And this is the hinge moment. So you have all the problems of 1850 starting to blow up. And then Southerners wanting more states. I mean, this whole convoluted system. And then Stephen Douglas, the very ambitious politician from Illinois, and he wants to jump from the Senate to the presidency. By the way, that's a horrible picture of Douglas. By pointing up, it makes him look what? And he's already relatively short. And so that's one of those, normally he was looking down, a commanding position, like the Colossus of Rhodes. This is a hinge moment. You know what the Colossus of Rhodes was? Yeah, this 50-foot bronze statue up in the island of Rhodes. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. We should get one. The Ottomans took it down in about 1200. It's too bad. But this is what Douglas wanted. Douglas wanted a transcontinental railroad. He wanted government funding of the railroad. He wanted a northern route. Now, don't get bogged down. We might not think this is northern, but it was northern to them. Starting in Chicago, where he'd get a lot of even financial benefit, going across Iowa, all the way to San Francisco. The problem is, you see this unorganized territory. That's the northern route. Now, there's talk of a southern route here. But he wants it here. What a great political victory if he could get that through his home state. And so, the problem is this. There's no territorial governments. They need governments here to have the railroad go through. This is still unorganized, operating by, well, technically under the U.S. military, the tiny little U.S. Army. Now, what law said that these would be free, no slave codes? Remember the Missouri Compromise? Just this area. That's why nobody wanted to touch it. That's why it's still unorganized. So Douglas proposed the first thing. Let's make 2 territories. Kansas, Nebraska, right? What do the fire eaters do? We will blow the country up if you bring them in as free territories. We'll destroy everything. We'll blow it up. And they told Douglas, not only we'll potentially blow the country up, even if we don't blow the country up, we're going to push for a southern route. Ha ha! Douglas, incredibly ambitious, needing Southerners, makes the move. The move. That changes everything. They repealed the Missouri Compromise and created 2 new territories, Kansas and Nebraska. You are sitting in Nebraska territory, what was then Nebraska territory, and said popular sovereignty. We'll let the people decide down the road. And what did that mean? These 2 territories are going to be open to slavery. They will have to pass slave codes, and then down the road they'll have a vote whether or not they'll have slavery. So you are sitting on land that was part of a slave territory. I know you normally don't think of Montana being a slave territory. It was, at least this part of Montana. Once you cross the divide, it wasn't. That was Oregon territory. Washington territory, I'm sorry. This was the equivalent of exploding a 100 megaton nuclear bomb on Washington, D.C. It blew everything up. The entire country, from let's go 1787 or 1788, the Constitution was ratified, 1854, that's one country. We have a new country, 1854 on. Everything changed. Everything changed. This is the moment. Now, at the time, they might not have seen it, but it's almost now impossible to imagine not having a civil war. It's done. This changed everything. Both political parties blown apart. The Democrats held on, the Whigs gone. It changed everything, especially here. A bunch of free soilers came in, and a few pro-slavery people, and let's start civil war. Almost immediately, bleeding Kansas. Civil War from 1854 all the way till 1865. Why is 1865 an important date? What would happen in 1865? What would end in 1865? The Civil War. Kansas, all along this edge. And this is important because there's going to be more free soilers come in. There's more free soilers. But pro-slavery people could just cross the border. And how can you tell the difference between somebody from Missouri or somebody from Kansas? Oh, Kansas will come up with ways, and I'll tell you. So the free soiler people would soon be dubbed Jayhawkers. Jayhawkers. And they were the free soilers. Kansas would become a free soil state, so that's why it's called the Jayhawk state. Jayhawkers. And they would arm and defend themselves against attack from those across the border. And their militia started wearing red leggings, kind of red, basically, more than anything else, just a red strip of cloth around their calves. Used to be leggings, but pretty soon just tie something red around your leg. That's how you can tell they were a Jayhawk. And these kind of wars were horrible. Attacks on someone's farm, cities, burn down their farm, kill their crop, burn down their crop, kill their animals. They'd respond in kind. People would get in the middle, trying to defend their crop, they would die. This was a horrible, bloodthirsty war. Just always on the edge. Not quite full-scale combat, but it's always that threat. Yeah.
So was it, I got lost right here. Are the Jayhawkers, free soil?
Yeah, they're free soil.
Okay.
And that's why, the University of Kansas, they're nicknamed the Jayhawks. That's why. Sure.
Thanks.
And that's he's got a red around his boots. I mean, you can't really tell. The pro-slavery people would generically be called border ruffians because so many crossed over the border from Missouri. And there they are on the right, jumping into the election to go vote because no one could tell where they were from. And they also show that they're a bunch of drunk. This is an anti-border ruffian. You see them all going to the whiskey tent. And they would do raids to try to intimidate free soil. There weren't as many, so they were generally more violent. But you can imagine violence breeds violence. And once it's happened, it's hard to back down. So this low-grade Civil War turned into full-scale Civil War when the Civil War began, but would go all the way to 1865. And the most famous incident, at least early on, was the sack of Lawrence, because this is going to breed a couple big things. May 21st, 1856, border ruffians crossed over, picking up pro-slavery people who lived in Kansas, and rode into the free soil town of Lawrence. They rode in on a raid, but the big thing was just to intimidate, to try to get them to move. They're using terror. So they burned down buildings, they, especially the newspaper, shot up animals. Yes, a few people would be hit, a couple killed. The big thing was they destroyed the Free Soil Hotel. Oh, I'm sorry, the Free State Hotel. The big deal. They had one cannon, they blew it up, and then rode out of town. So they're just a bunch of bushwhackers. They came in and did this. But Free Soilers heard about this attack and said there was the sack of Lawrence was the massacre of Lawrence. Now, I don't know what defines a massacre, but do you remember an example in here where I said that certain groups used as propaganda against the British, let's say? What was the massacre that the patriots would call it? Remember the Boston Massacre, 1770? And yes, some people were killed. By the way, what defines a massacre? If somebody you know, it's a massacre. More than one person's a massacre, especially if you know them. But anyways, they exaggerated it. Well, news went all over. Free Soilers furious, convinced that these bushwhackers are going to attack even more places. And I want to defend them. They were a bunch of, they all got drunk and came in and just destroyed everything they could destroy. That's literally what happened. Well, just 2 days later, on the floor of the United States Senate, Charles Sumner, the same guy who befriended Taylor, gave a speech called The Crime Against Kansas. Now, a lot of things changed because of this, so I had to pick them in some order. Do you notice the big shift? This is Massachusetts, right? What does the R stand for? The brand new Free Soil Republican Party. So he's a Republican. I should add, I like this picture. He wanted to look like a fighter. But this is more and more Northerners are saying we're going to fight back against Southern bullying. And in this speech, not only did he attack the pro-slavery border ruffians for this brutal attack on Lawrence, he personally attacked one of their great defenders, Senator Andrew Butler. Now, do you notice Butler, it says a Democrat. He was a Whig, but when the Whig Party blew up, all Southern Whigs became Democrats. They weren't going to become Republicans, that's for sure. He attacked him by name, which kind of goes against the senatorial rules. They have a certain decorum they want to have. Butler's cousin, Preston Brooks, and Brooks' nickname was literally Bully. That was his nickname. Brooks decided to get his revenge. So he walked into the Senate chambers. Now, the current Senate and House chambers are being built at this time. The old Capitol, though, the House and Senate chambers, the Senate chambers wasn't much bigger than this classroom. So just imagine, 40 people packed, or not 40, over 50 people packed into this classroom. How do you do it? They bolted in little desks. They had to bolt them in so they couldn't move them because there's so little room. And there were kind of little daises going down, and they're packed in. And Sumner was a big guy, over 6 foot, really big for the time. He couldn't fit in the desk. He had to kind of fold himself in. And he's on the aisle seat because he had to sit on the aisle. Well, knowing this, Brooks walked in, and people should have known something was up, because all of his friends were in the gallery to cheer him on. And other Southern senators knew what was going to happen. They all had canes. They're all carrying their canes. Pretty common. Imagine a thick walking cane, not that thick. Oak. Walked in. You're going to be. You ready? Yeah. It's for the class, right?
Yes.
So he walked in, and Sumner didn't know. As he came walking in, there was a hush. I mean, like everyone. And he walked into Sumner and said, "You have brought dishonor to my family, prepared to and just as they say, defend yourself." He started beating him over the head with his cane. Just like no warning at all. Beating him over the head. Sumner tried to get out of his desk, but he's caught. He actually ripped the desk out of its bolts. Then collapsed on the floor. Brooks is beating him and beating him. On top, they're chanting, "Beat him, beat him, beat him." Friends of Sumner, Northerners especially, rush to his aid, and various Southern senators are there with their canes to block him off so Butler could finish. Sumner was hurt so bad that, well, they didn't know then, but now we know what it was. It was spinal fluid was coming out of his nose. That's how badly he was beaten. He'd be bedridden for almost 4 years. Nearly killed him. And then Brooks stormed off. They didn't know what to do. You can't really arrest a member of Congress, especially in the Capitol. In fact, you can't arrest them. They're above the law. And so they censured him, and he resigned in a huff. Yeah, you can't arrest him. Well, there's a very good reason, but it's going to be abused. Obviously.
So they can't arrest the people who break the law,
Or kill somebody.
But
Yeah.
they can't arrest them.
They can't arrest them.
Because that makes sense.
It actually does, but.
But.
So just imagine if the president, the executive is one to arrest. If the president can arrest members of Congress, couldn't they say, "I'm going to arrest you unless you vote with me"?
Jesus.
So they have, by definition, they have to be, but I think you can see a problem. So members of Congress are famous for speeding around Washington, D.C. at 100 miles per hour. Yeah. The best, Lyndon Johnson, when he was a young man, probably the most powerful president in American history. In the 30s and 40s, he'd drive around the Lincoln Continentals at 150 miles per hour, 120 miles per hour on Pennsylvania. So there's problems with it. But moving on. He would be sent back, and Southern admirers would send Brooks what? Hundreds of more canes. Overjoyed. So here's, by the way, the cane is in a bank in Boston. That's the cane. It's in a bank in Boston. Because. But here is an anti-Brooks cartoon, anti-Southern one. Southern chivalry. And Southerners like to portray themselves as we have honor while the North are a bunch of money grubbers. Yeah. Southern chivalry. And here's argument versus clubs. Here's Sumner, and that says the crime against Kansas. You see Kansas written right there? And notice people trying to come to his aid, being stopped by the cane. And then my favorite, look at this guy. Laughing at being nearly beaten to death. So, Northerners more and more, so we've had enough of this crap. They brought flash guns, they flash knives, we've had enough. Wow, there's civil war going on. It's an amazing time. And there's still a lot of people saying, "No, nothing will happen. The South isn't really that bad." Really, you have this. Who's that? That's on the rotunda of the state capitol of Kansas, Topeka. Now, he didn't look like that when he was there, but that is John Brown. John Brown had made it his life's work to end the evils of slavery. So when he heard about the bleeding Kansas, he went south to fight against the pro-slavery people. And when he heard about the sack of Lawrence, he wanted revenge. John Brown. So for about 5 years, I was able to get this as my yearbook photo in the Capitol High yearbooks. That was my picture. Until finally they told me they couldn't do it anymore. I was so sad I couldn't get John Brown anymore. And it was because parents were mad. They wanted to see what their teachers look like. And many of them responded with, why does he have a picture of Abraham Lincoln? Which made me laugh in a very dark way, but it's John Brown. So you have to go like in the library and look at some of the ones from the early 2000s, yearbooks. You see John Brown as my picture. Yes. I still want it back, but yeah.
Dress up like the next time in Brown.
I do. I don't like them taking my picture. I don't want them stealing my shadow. You agree with me? Are you scared to have your picture taken too, as they film me? Crazy Horse always said that would never allow his picture to be taken. The great Lakota warrior. And he said, I don't want my shadow stolen. So we don't know what Crazy Horse looked like. And I like that. I'm sticking with it. John Brown. And so at Pottawattamie Creek in this beautiful mountain valley, you notice it is 3 days after the sack of Lawrence, just after the crown, and he heard about that at Pottawattamie Creek. John Brown and his followers, including a couple of his 17 sons, 2 wives, they rode on a pro-slavery settlement. Now, one of the men might have been involved in the sack of Lawrence, but he heard that they were involved in this massacre. This doesn't excuse it, but remember, we have all kinds of different things going on. They drug the men out as being part of this massacre and executed them with broadswords in response. No excuse for this heinous murder, but don't forget, this was the reality of these types of wars makes them just that much worse. A broadsword is a sword about this long, about 2 feet long. That's about 2 feet, isn't it? And about this thick. And the idea would be, the U.S. Army bought a bunch of these to give their artillerymen. So if cavalry charged them, they could go to a knee and use this big sword to disembowel the horses as they go by. Now the problem is, no one's going to have enough guts to go like this to a knee as a horse charges by. So they just basically gave them away to people, and that's why John Brown had them. But we're not done with John Brown. There's a lot of stuff on John Brown. Soon after, my great-great-great-uncle would ride with John Brown. help you, my good man?
I didn't get all of
I forgot to tell third period, I'm just gonna. Sound good? If anyone want to get one, let me know. Okay, I have good news for almost all of you. What is the good news? Maps will be due tomorrow, and we'll have the test. Oh, I'm gonna talk about DBQ. I thought about Friday, or Thursday, but I'm talking about DBQs tomorrow, I think.